So when you think of the most budget-conscious and budget-friendly HO scale steam locomotives, what do you think of? Maybe the tried and true Bachmann USRA 060, a used Mantua locomotive? Or how about something from Mahano? Well, those are certainly good options, but let me show you what I believe is the greatest HO scale steam locomotive you can purchase for around $50. This is the Brazilian-made Freight 280 steam locomotive.
You're going to Brazil!
If you haven't heard of Freight before, I wouldn't be surprised. They are a Brazilian-based manufacturer that mostly sells in South American countries, although they do have outlets in Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, and Switzerland as well. They partnered with the American manufacturer Atlas Railroad to bring some of their products to the United States, although to my knowledge, this partnership is no longer in effect. The Freight 280 is pretty much the brand's only steam locomotive, bar a 460 that uses the exact same body tooling. The locomotive comes in 3 Brazilian liveries, and interestingly enough, it is offered in 4 liveries lettered for American roads. This particular locomotive came to the US in the early 2000s when, for a very short time, Model Rectifier Corp imported them under their Model Power brand, which added a couple more American liveries to the lineup, like ATSF and Southern Pacific. The locomotive itself is based upon a Baldwin-built design for, and I know I'm going to butcher this, the Estrada de Ferro Central do Brasil in 1908. I cannot find as much info about what this class would have actually been called, how many were actually built, and a Brazilian site claims that the photos of this class were actually quite a rarity. Well, damn. What I can say is that this class had the numbers 528 through 557 at least, with a very good possibility there were more. What we do know about these locomotives is they originally entered service in 1909 and would stay with the EFCB until 1960. So let's get into this model. And it's fairly well known that Freight models aren't exactly super well scaled models that fit in perfectly with 187 scale. This 280 is no exception, with general proportions being closer to 185 and the length of the tender being closer to 164 actually. And there are some details that have been flubbed to make it fit around tighter curves. Looking at side by side, you can nitpick some details, but it absolutely looks the part and will very easily represent the class that it is based on. The body is mostly molded in 3 pieces, with the boiler, running boards, and cab being separate pieces. A nice detail on this cab is that the top vent is open. Almost every steam locomotive I've ever seen operating has had that vent open, and very few model locomotives seem to have that open. So, props Freight. Interestingly, the whistle on this locomotive is a separate piece, which is a piece that is usually molded into the body on Rivarossi, Mahano, and Bachmann models that can be had for a similar price. The bell and the headlight are also separate pieces, with the rest of the pipework and the air pump being molded into the body. The locomotive does have separate metal handrails running the length of the boiler and 2 plastic ones running from the smoke box to meet the front of the pilot. Interestingly enough, this locomotive comes with a crew member in the cab. Just one. He's lonely forever. I removed mine, and we can really appreciate that very nice boiler backhead detail in the cab with that obstruction removed. Let's talk about the tender details. It's a super simple thing, with the body being molded in 2 pieces, with the body and the coal being separate, as the EFCB version of this locomotive has a cover over the front of the coal load. There's really not much to talk about here. It's simple, looks the part, and even on the real one, it appears the tender was pretty simple. Now we get to the shit that I really care about. I like to talk performance, and this is generally where cheaper locomotives tend to falter and really fall off. I'm looking at you, Bachmann USRA 060. This is a really, really smooth performing locomotive with some excellent pulling power. I bet it'll pull as much as that Rivarossi big boy with arthritis I looked at a while back. It is certainly smoother, and this locomotive isn't exactly large, so you'd be hard pressed to find a good performing motor for this size of a locomotive in this price range. So, how'd they put such a good mechanism into the locomotive? Well, they didn't. This locomotive is actually tender drive, with the body coming off to reveal a fairly beefy looking motor and 2 massive weights filling in the rest of the body. There is no spare space. The funniest thing about this is that there actually isn't any room for universal joints, so the tender trucks just don't rotate. So, how do you get one of these locomotives? Well, I've stumbled across a few of them at train shows for around the $45 to $50 range, although recently and online their value seems to be going up, usually now being in the $75 to $100 range. So if you want to import one brand new from Brazil, you're going to be looking at a nearly $200 locomotive. So I would just recommend to lurk around at train shows and bargain with sellers. And even at $75, I'd still call this a pretty fair deal. I see a ton of potential for customization with these, especially being a good base model for a Penske H1 280. I can see these locomotives being sought after in the future for customizers, so if you want one, I'd probably try and pick one up as soon as possible, especially if you want one as a first steam locomotive, as I can see their value, at least in the United States, increasing in the future tenfold.